Hey, it's Johnny Alanya with the Alanya Real Estate Group, and I wanted to talk to you about the earnest money deposit and how it relates to contingencies within a real estate transaction in California. The earnest money deposit is a protection for the seller in case the buyer decides to back out of a transaction for whatever reason. Now, the contingencies are a protection for the buyer to be able to do their due diligence in purchasing a home. So the first contingency is the inspection contingency. By default, this is supposed to be released within 17 days. Now, of course, you can move those days to a shorter time period to make your offer more appealing to the seller. And I would tell you on my side, I usually tend to do 10 days regardless. That's enough time to do most inspections. And what you do is in that period, obviously you hire a general home inspector, they do an inspection, you get a report, and then you submit what's called a request for repairs. And I always tell people it's exactly as it sounds. It's just a request. It's not a demand. It's something that the seller can choose to do or not to do. And of course, that's another negotiating period of the contract. So when you put that request for repairs in, you want to make sure that there's no deal killers when you've done your home inspection. If there's something that is absolutely wrong with the house, then you probably don't want to move forward and you probably want to back out. In that case, you would get your money deposit back. Okay. Now, if you've worked out that situation and you're cool with moving forward, the next contingency is the appraisal contingency. And the appraisal contingency is also by default supposed to be released within 17 days. Now, depending on how we formulate the offer and the type of financing, I usually would do 14 days for that. And if you could do sooner, even better. Now, the appraisal contingency is based upon hiring an appraiser. They evaluate the value of that home in today's market. And then if that value comes in at the price that you offered for the house, then there's really no problem. Now, if it came in lower, that's another point in negotiating where either the seller comes down in price or you, the buyer, would come up in price to and bring more cash to the transaction to meet that difference. If you can't come into an agreement with between the buyer and the seller, you back out of the transaction, you'd get your money back. And the last contingency is the loan approval contingency. This is where the loan officer that you're working with will submit all your information to a processor. The processor puts all that information together and they give it to the underwriter. And the underwriter is actually the person who makes the final decision on if your loan's approved. When it gets to that point and you've gotten final or conditional loan approval, then that's the okay to release that contingency, which is usually within 21 days. Of course, depending on the lender you have, you could always move some of that stuff forward if you're able to work quickly. And that is something that would appeal to a seller by having all those things move forward. Now, to go back to the earnest money deposit, if you've gotten to this point, you've released all your contingencies, and for whatever reason, you decided to back out of that transaction, you do potentially put that earnest money deposit up for forfeiture to the seller for, basically wasting their time, losing out on other potential offers. And of course, they've accrued some time, for their mortgage. They have to pay another mortgage now, possibly. So anyways, I hope that explains the process of how a contingency helps protect the buyer and how the earnest money deposit helps protect the seller. Of course, when that earnest money deposit is at a higher dollar amount, of course, that's going to make a seller want to choose, or it makes that contract more appealing, or that offer more appealing to the seller. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I can, of course, dive into this a little bit deeper, but I hope that helps you in understanding a portion of a real estate transaction in California.